In a mansion bathed in candlelight and secrets, a single question shattered the fragile elegance of the night. "Are you still a virgin?" The room held its breath, but it was her answer, bold, reckless, whispered with drunken courage, that set everything ablaze. "Actually, I'm losing it tonight." And in that instant, Franklin Whitmore, the untouchable second-in-command, felt something he'd buried for years crack wide open. Jealousy, desire, and a dangerous need to possess what should never be his. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was truly worth listening to, click the super thanks button too. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. The air inside the Whitmore mansion tasted of old money and even older secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast amber light over the mahogany table, where silver clinked against porcelain in a rhythm as predictable as the tides. Emmy sat perfectly still, her emerald green dress catching the candlelight, aware of every gaze that occasionally drifted her way. She was the outsider here, the Brazilian translator brought into this world of southern aristocracy and whispered violence. But tonight, she'd been invited to something more intimate, a private dinner among the clan's inner circle. Franklin Whitmore occupied the head of the table like a king surveying his court. His presence was magnetic, commanding without effort. Dark hair slicked back, jaw carved from stone, eyes the color of aged whiskey that rarely revealed emotion. He was the Whitmore family's second-in-command, the man everyone feared and no one dared challenge. And all evening, Emmy felt the weight of that gaze on her, discreet but constant like an invisible hand resting on her shoulder. Conversation flowed in low tones, punctuated by controlled laughter and ceremonious toasts. Emmy picked up her glass of red wine, feeling the velvety liquid slide down her throat, warming her from within. The taste was rich, earthy, with notes of dark cherry and spices. She wasn't used to drinking this much, but tonight something in the air made her want to let loose just a little. That's when Logan, one of the clan's capos, a man with broad shoulders and a too-easy smile, leaned across the table, eyes glinting with mischief as he fixed his gaze on Emmy. The murmur of conversations began to fade, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. "Emmy," Logan said, his voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade, "I have a question that's been eating at me all night." She looked up, meeting his eyes with a calm she didn't feel inside. Her heart began to beat faster, a distant drum echoing in her ears. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the tingling climbing up her spine. Logan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Are you still a virgin?" Silence fell like a guillotine. Silverware stopped mid-air, glasses froze halfway to lips. Time itself seemed to hesitate, holding its breath along with everyone in the room. Emmy felt heat rise up her neck, but it wasn't shame. It was pure adrenaline mixed with wine and a boldness she didn't know she possessed. She could have looked away, could have laughed nervously or changed the subject. But something inside her, maybe the wine, maybe the exhaustion of always being the good girl, always the well-behaved one, made her lean forward slightly, lips curving into a defiant smile. "Actually," she said, her voice soft as velvet but sharp as glass, "I'm losing it tonight." The impact was immediate. Logan's eyes widened, genuine surprise stamped across his face. Some around the table coughed uncomfortably, others exchanged furtive glances. But it was Franklin who changed completely. Emmy didn't need to look to feel it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The air grew thick, charged with a dangerous electricity. She heard the low, threatening creak, the sound of wood being crushed under extreme pressure. When she finally turned, her eyes met Franklin's for the first time since the words left her mouth. He was still seated, but every muscle in his body seemed stretched to its limit. His right hand gripped the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. The fine wood groaned under his fingers, small cracks beginning to form, but it was his eyes that held her paralyzed. That golden gaze that was normally so controlled, so impenetrable, now burned with something wild and primal. Jealousy, possessiveness, desire. All mixed in a storm he was clearly struggling to contain. Franklin stood slowly, the movement fluid and predatory. Each step toward her echoed in the sepulchral silence of the room. No one dared speak, no one dared move. Emmy felt her heart race, blood roaring in her ears as he approached. He stopped behind her, so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body, the scent of his cologne. Cedarwood, leather, and something indefinable that was purely him. His hand landed on the back of her chair, fingers inches from her bare shoulder. The wood cracked again under his grip. "Logan." Franklin's voice was low, dangerously calm, but loaded with an authority that brooked no opposition. "Choose your questions more carefully in the future." It wasn't a request, it was an order, and everyone in the room understood perfectly. Emmy remained motionless, every nerve in her body hyper-alert. She could feel his breath grazing her neck, warm and controlled, but there was something behind that control, something hungry and desperate. Her fingers trembled slightly over her wineglass, the liquid rippling in small waves. Franklin leaned in, just enough for his voice to reach only her, a rough whisper that sent shivers down her entire spine. "We need to talk. Now." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command wrapped in unspoken promises and hidden dangers. Emmy swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the wine. She nodded, unable to trust her own voice. He pulled back, but before doing so completely, his fingers brushed, just for a second so lightly it could have been imagination, the exposed skin of her shoulder. That brief touch burned like fire, marking her in a way she knew she wouldn't forget any time soon. As Franklin walked toward the French doors leading to the veranda, Emmy stood on trembling legs. She could feel the curious stares of the others, the unasked questions, the tension still pulsing in the air. But none of it mattered, because for the first time since arriving in this city, this family, this life, she felt that something real was about to happen, something that would change everything. The veranda stretched out like a stage suspended between two worlds. On one side, the golden light and muffled voices from dinner. On the other, the darkness of the garden where shadows danced beneath the silver moonlight. Emmy crossed through the French doors, the cool night air embracing her skin, warmed by wine and adrenaline. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, each step echoing her hesitation. Franklin was already there, his back to her, hands resting on the stone balustrade. His broad shoulders partially blocked the full moon, creating a silver halo around him. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he was aware of her every movement, the way he tilted his head slightly, the tension visible in his back. For a long moment, only the sound of crickets and the distant rustling of leaves filled the space between them. Emmy stopped a few steps away, nervously intertwining her fingers, feeling the night's chill against her bare arms. She waited and waited. Finally, Franklin spoke, his voice rougher than usual, loaded with something she couldn't fully identify. "Do you have any idea what you just did in there?" It wasn't an accusation. It was something closer to contained desperation. Amy lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. "I answered a question, an invasive and inappropriate question, I might add." He turned then, so quickly she took an involuntary step back. His eyes met hers with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. There was pain there, mixed with fury and something deeper, something that made her heart clench. "You declared in front of dangerous men that you planned to give yourself to someone tonight." Each word came out measured, controlled, but vibrating with repressed emotion. "You made yourself a target, Emmy. Not just for Logan, but for anyone in that room who decides to test boundaries." Emmy blinked, the reality of his words beginning to penetrate the fog of wine and boldness. "I didn't think." "Exactly," he interrupted, taking a step toward her. "You didn't think. Because you don't understand this world, don't understand how these people work." Her anger flared then, hot and defensive. "Then explain it to me," she shot back, closing the distance between them. "You brought me into this world, Franklin. Gave me a job here, an apartment, access to people I should never have met. And this whole time you never explained the rules, never told me what I should or shouldn't do." He ran his hand through his hair, messing up the perfectly arranged strands, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen him make before. "Because you shouldn't be here." The words came out like a confession torn by force. "You never should have entered this world." The silence that followed was different, heavier, loaded with secrets about to be revealed. Emmy felt her heart race again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. "What do you mean by that?" she whispered. Franklin looked away, his jaw tightening as he fought an internal battle. When he finally faced her again, there was resignation in his eyes, as if he were about to cross a line he couldn't undo. "Your father," he began, and Emmy's world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Your father worked for us, for the Whitmore family, years ago before you were born, before he went back to Brazil." Her legs weakened. She reached for the balustrade for support, her fingers gripping the cold stone. "My father?" Her voice came out fractured, disbelieving. "That's impossible. He was a teacher. He was many things," Franklin interrupted gently but without looking away. "Including a man who knew too much and who because of that needed to disappear. We helped him, kept him safe, and in return he helped us with connections in South America." Emmy shook her head, trying to process, trying to connect the man she'd known. The gentle father who taught her to read, who told stories at night, who died when she was 15, with the shadowy world Franklin was describing. "Why are you telling me this now?" Franklin took another step toward her, reducing the space between them to almost nothing. She could see every detail of his face in the moonlight, the strong line of his jaw, the thin scar above his left eyebrow, the way his lips pressed together as he chose his next words. "Because before he died, your father made me promise something." His voice lowered, becoming intimate, vulnerable. "He made me swear that if you ever came to the United States, I would take care of you, that I'd keep you safe, that I'd protect you from all of this." Tears burned her eyes, but Emmy held them back, refusing to let them fall. "The scholarship. I arranged it, through a foundation we quietly fund. The translator job, created specifically for you, to keep you close, where I could watch over you. The apartment, reinforced, monitored, in the safest building I own." Each revelation fell like a stone in still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she knew about her life for the past 2 years. Anger and gratitude mixed inside her, creating a whirlwind of emotions she didn't know how to process. "So everything was a lie," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything I achieved, everything I thought was mine." "It was real," Franklin interrupted, his hand moving as if to touch her but stopping in the air between them. "Your intelligence is real. Your talent is real. I just created the circumstances. You did the rest." Amy stared at him, searching for lies, for manipulation, for any sign this was just another game. But all she saw was raw sincerity and something more, something that made her chest tighten and her breath fail. "Why did you care so much?" she whispered. "Why keep a promise to a dead man? You could have given me money, kept me at a distance. Why bring me so close?" The question hung between them, heavy and inevitable. Franklin closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was a vulnerability in them she never imagined possible in this man of stone. "Because I promised your father, and because—" He hesitated, and for the first time since she'd known him, Franklin Whitmore seemed uncertain. "Because from the first day I saw you, something inside me changed, and I couldn't stay away." Her heart exploded in wild beats. The air between them crackled with electricity, every inch of distance seeming both too large and dangerously small. "Franklin," she began, but didn't know how to finish. Didn't know what to say in the face of a confession that changed everything. He took the final step, eliminating the distance, so close now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. She could feel his warmth, the woody, masculine scent that made her dizzy. Her fingers gripped the balustrade behind her to keep her balance. "That answer you gave in there," he said, his voice low and rough, "drove me crazy. The idea of you with someone else, of someone touching you, knowing you that way." He closed his eyes, jaw tightening. "I'm not a good man, Emmy, but in that moment, I wanted to kill everyone in the room just for the possibility." The confession was so raw, so visceral, it stole all her words. She just stared at him, seeing the man behind the mask, the desire behind the control, the need behind the duty, and something inside her, something that had been growing silently for months of stolen glances, accidental touches, and late-night conversations, finally found its voice. "What if I told you," she whispered, each word a deliberate choice, That there's no one else. His eyes widened, breath catching. Emmy, what if I told you those words were for you, to see if you'd finally react? The world stopped, and then Franklin did something she never expected. He laughed, a low, incredulous, completely human sound. "You're impossible," he murmured, and there was affection in his voice mixed with desperation. "Impossible and perfect and completely out of my reach." "Then reach for me," she challenged, heart in her throat. And for an infinite moment, she thought he would. Thought he'd close the distance, that his lips would finally meet hers. But Franklin Whitmore was a man of control, and even now, even with desire burning visibly in his eyes, he pulled back. "Not like this," he said, voice rough. "Not when you've been drinking, not when you're still processing all of this. You deserve more." And with those words he walked away, leaving her alone on the veranda beneath the moonlight, with her heart racing and an unspoken promise hanging in the air between them. 3 days had passed since that night on the veranda. 3 days in which Amy barely slept, every thought revolving around those revelations, that near confession, that moment when the entire world seemed to shrink to the space between her and Franklin. 3 days during which she hadn't seen him once. He was avoiding her. She knew it, felt it in his absence from the office hallways, in meetings that were cancelled without explanation, in messages always answered by assistants. Franklin Whitmore, the man who controlled empires and commanded loyalties, was running from her. And that, more than anything else, confirmed everything she needed to know. He felt the same way, and it terrified him. On the morning of the 4th day, Emmy woke with a determination that burned hotter than the coffee she made. She wore a navy blue dress that accentuated every curve of her body, pulled her hair into a low bun that left her neck exposed, and applied just a touch of perfume, something floral and lightly spiced that she knew he'd notice. If Franklin wanted to play this game of cat and mouse, she'd show him she knew how to hunt too. The Whitmore family's main office was on the top floor of a glass and steel building in the heart of Savannah. The walls were lined with dark wood, expensive artwork decorated every space, and the silence was the kind that only very old money could buy. Emmy crossed the corridor with determined steps, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Franklin's assistant, a middle-aged woman named Margaret with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing, looked up as Emmy approached. "Miss Emmy, Mr. Whitmore is on an important call and—" "I don't care," Emmy said softly but with a firmness that brooked no opposition. "I need to speak with him now." Margaret blinked, surprised, but something in Emmy's gaze must have communicated the urgency, because she simply nodded and returned to her documents. Emmy pushed through the double oak doors without knocking. The office was exactly as she'd imagined, massive, dominated by a mahogany desk that looked like it had seen generations of Whitmore's floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. And there, standing by the window with a phone pressed to his ear, was Franklin. He turned the moment the door opened, eyes widening slightly at the sight of her. He murmured something into the phone and hung up without ceremony, the device falling onto the desk with a dull thud. "Emmy?" His voice was controlled, but she caught the tension behind it. "I was busy. You're avoiding me," she cut in, closing the door behind her with a definitive click. "For 3 days." He didn't deny it, just watched her, those golden eyes traveling over her face as if memorizing every detail. She saw when his gaze dropped briefly to the dress, to the curve of her neck, before returning to her eyes. His jaw tightened. "I thought you needed space," he finally said. "Space," she repeated, the word coming out bitter. "Or did you need distance?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Emmy crossed the office, each step measured, deliberate. She stopped on the other side of the desk, placing the solid barrier between them, but somehow that only intensified the tension. "You told me things that night," she began, her voice low but firm. "Things about my father, about why I'm here. Things about how you feel." Franklin closed his eyes briefly, as if fighting something internal. "I shouldn't have said no," she interrupted, voice louder now. "Don't do that. Don't take it back. Not after making me feel—" She stopped, breathing deeply. "Not after making me hope that finally something real was happening between us." He opened his eyes, and what she saw there made her lose her breath. Pain, desire, conflict. All mixed in a storm he clearly didn't know how to navigate. "Something real can't happen between us," he said, each word seeming to cost him. "Not when I promise to protect you. Not when every day in this world puts you in danger." Emmy felt anger rise, hot and defensive. "You don't get to decide that alone," she shot back. "Not about me, not about what I feel or what I want." "You don't know what you want," he responded, his own frustration finally leaking through. "You don't understand what it means to be with me, what that would make you." "Then explain it to me," she shouted, slamming her hands on the desk. "Stop treating me like I'm a child who needs to be protected from the truth. I'm a grown woman, Franklin, and I deserve to choose my own life." He came around the desk so fast, she barely had time to react. Suddenly he was there, so close she could see the golden flecks in his eyes, the fine lines of exhaustion around them, the way his breathing was as uneven as hers. "So you want the truth," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The truth is that every second I spend near you is torture. The truth is that I think about you all the time. When I wake up, when I work, when I should be focused on keeping people alive. The truth is that night on the veranda, it took everything I had not to kiss you, not to pick you up and carry you away from all of this." Her heart was beating so hard, she was certain he could hear it. "Then why didn't you?" she whispered. "Because I promised your father." His voice came out rough, desperate. "Because he looked me in the eyes, knowing he was dying, and made me swear I'd keep you safe, that I'd keep you away from this life. And here I am, wanting to pull you into it, wanting to make you mine in every possible way." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Emmy felt tears burn her eyes, but not from sadness, from something deeper, more true. "My father's been dead for 9 years, she said softly. "And I loved him. But he can't dictate my life forever. He can't choose for me." Franklin shook his head, running his hand over his face in a gesture of exhaustion. "You don't understand the weight of a promise like that, what it means to men like me." "Then help me understand," she pleaded, her hand moving to touch his arm. The contact was electric, making them both freeze. "Stop pushing me away. Stop deciding what's best for me without asking what I want." He looked at her hand on his arm, and she saw the moment something inside him gave way. He turned his hand, fingers intertwining with hers, thumb tracing slow circles against her skin. The touch was simple, but loaded with so much intention, it sent shivers through her entire body. "And what do you want, Emmy?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Tell me, because I need to hear you say it." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I want to stop pretending I don't feel anything when you walk into a room. I want to stop lying to myself about what those looks mean, about what happens inside me every time you're near. I want—" She hesitated, but then decided there was no point in hiding anymore. "I want you, Franklin, not as a protector, not as the man who promised to take care of me. I want you as the man who looks at me like I'm the only real thing in a world of lies." His breath failed. His fingers tightened around hers, and for a long moment he just stared at her, as if engraving her words somewhere deep inside him. "You're killing me," he whispered, and there was so much emotion in those words her heart clenched. "Then stop fighting," she replied, taking a step closer. "Just for a moment. Forget the promises. Forget duty. Forget everything except this." And she leaned in, closing the distance, her lips inches from his. She could feel his warm breath against her mouth, see the way his eyes darkened, feel the tension in every muscle of his body. Franklin remained motionless for an endless second, and then, with a sound that was almost a groan of surrender, his free hand rose to her face, fingers sliding along her jaw, thumb tracing her lower lip with a reverence that made her tremble. "If I start," he murmured, eyes fixed on her mouth, "I won't be able to stop." "Good," she whispered, "because I don't want you to stop." And that was it, the last line being crossed, the last remnant of resistance dissolving. His lips met hers with an intensity that stole all the air from her lungs. The kiss was everything she'd imagined, and nothing she could have prepared for. Hot, desperate, full of months of denial and repressed desire. Her hands rose to his neck, fingers sliding through the hair she'd always wanted to touch. He pulled her closer, eliminating any space between them. One hand firm on her waist, the other still holding her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they finally separated, both were breathless, foreheads touching, eyes closed, trying to absorb what had just happened. "There's no going back," Franklin murmured against her lips. "Not after this." "I know," Emmy replied, opening her eyes to meet his. "And I don't want to go back." He held her for another moment, and then, with a sigh that seemed to carry years of weight, pulled back slightly, creating space to breathe, to think. "Emmy, if we're going to do this, it needs to be done right," he said, his voice still hoarse. "Not hidden, not like something dirty. You deserve more." She smiled, heart overflowing. "Then give me more." And for the first time since she'd known him, Franklin Whitmore truly smiled, a slow, genuine, and completely devastating smile. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Tonight, just the two of us, and let me do this right." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." The beachfront apartment was different from anything Emmy expected. It wasn't the cold, impersonal fortress she'd imagined, but a refuge, glass walls that framed the ocean like a living painting, light wood that contrasted with fabrics in shades of cream and navy blue, and a sense of peace that seemed impossible for a man like Franklin. "Is this where you come when you want to escape?" she asked, setting her purse on the sofa as she walked toward the windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected on the waves. Franklin closed the door behind them, activating locks she didn't even know existed. He watched her for a moment, hands in his pockets, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. "This is where I come when I need to remember there's something beyond the darkness," he finally said, joining her at the window. "When I need to breathe." Emmy turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. It was getting easier to recognize now, those moments when the mask slipped and the man behind it appeared. "And now?" she asked softly. "Why did you bring me here?" He reached out, fingers brushing lightly against hers before intertwining them. "Because after dinner last night, when I dropped you off at home, I realized I didn't want to be away from you anymore." His voice was low, intimate. "And because here, no one can find us, no one can interrupt us, it's just you and me." Her heart raced. They'd had dinner the night before at a discreet restaurant tucked away on a side street, where Franklin knew the owner and where no one asked questions. It had been perfect. Easy conversation, genuine laughter, subtle touches across the table. But he'd left her at her apartment door with only a chaste kiss on the forehead, leaving her wanting more. Now, here in this space that was entirely his, she understood. He was lowering all his defenses. The following days took on a rhythm of their own. Franklin still worked, calls he couldn't ignore, meetings that demanded his presence, but he always returned to the apartment where Emmy waited for him. She brought her books, her laptop, transforming a corner of the living room into her own workspace, and slowly they began to build something that felt frighteningly domestic. Mornings were Emmy waking to the smell of fresh coffee, finding Franklin already dressed but still barefoot, working on his laptop at the kitchen island. He'd look up when she appeared, and the smile that lit up his face was hers alone, small but genuine. "Good morning," he'd say, always with that morning rough voice that sent shivers down her spine. "Good morning," she'd reply, accepting the cup of coffee he'd already prepared, exactly the way she liked it. They'd have coffee together in comfortable silence, occasionally interrupted by comments about the news or plans for the day. But it was the touches that said more. The way he'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, how his fingers would linger on her waist when he passed by her, how his eyes followed her around the kitchen as if she were a work of art he couldn't stop admiring. At night, Franklin took on a different role. He'd sit with Emmy on the veranda, with the sound of the waves as a soundtrack, and teach her about the world she'd entered. Not the violent aspects. He seemed determined to protect her from that, but the unwritten codes, the etiquette, the meaning behind gestures and words. When someone tilts their head this way, he demonstrated, a subtle movement, it means respect, but reluctant. When they do this, another movement more pronounced, it's genuine submission. Emmy watched, fascinated, not just by the lessons but by the way he spoke. The way his lips moved when forming words, how his eyes narrowed when thinking, how his hands gestured expressively when explaining something complex. "Are you paying attention?" he asked one night, catching her distant gaze. "I am," she replied, a smile playing on her lips. "Just not necessarily to the words." He laughed, that sound she was collecting like precious treasures, and pulled her closer on the couch where they sat. "You're dangerous," he murmured against her hair. "Says the mobster," she teased, tilting her head back to look at him. The word hung between them heavy. Emmy rarely used it, and when she did, it was always carefully. But Franklin didn't pull back. Instead, he held her face between his hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "That's what I am," he said softly, "and that's why you should be with someone better." "I don't want someone better," she replied, covering his hands with hers. "I want you, with all your scars and secrets." He kissed her then, slow and deep, as if trying to communicate through touch everything words couldn't express. And Emmy melted against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the firmness of his hands, the way he always held her as if she were something precious and dangerous at the same time. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. Franklin rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "You drive me crazy," he confessed. "Completely crazy." "Good," she whispered, lips grazing his. "Because the feeling's mutual." One night, while rain beat against the windows, turning the outside world into a blurred watercolor, Emmy found Franklin sitting at the piano that occupied a corner of the living room. She didn't know he played. She'd never seen him approach the instrument before. He didn't notice her presence initially, lost in the music flowing from his fingers, a melancholic and beautiful melody that seemed to tell a story of loss and hope. Emmy approached silently, leaning against the side of the piano, just watching. His hands moved with surprising grace, long fingers dancing across the keys with familiarity born from years of practice. His eyes were closed, the expression on his face more relaxed than she'd ever seen. In this moment, he wasn't Franklin Whitmore, the feared second in command. He was just a man making music. When the last note echoed in the silence, he finally opened his eyes and found her there. "How long have you been standing there?" he asked, not seeming disturbed. "Long enough," she replied, rounding the piano to sit beside him on the bench. "You play beautifully. Why didn't you ever tell me?" He shrugged, fingers tracing the keys absent-mindedly. "It's something I only do for myself, something that's left of who I was before." "And who were you before?" she asked gently, turning to face him. Franklin was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the keys. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with longing. "I wanted to be a teacher," he confessed, "literature specifically. I spent my teenage years reading everything I could find, Shakespeare, Austen, the Russian classics. I had plans, dreams, and then my father died and my older brother took over the family and—" He stopped, shaking his head. "And I did what was expected of me." Emmy felt her heart clench. She touched his arm gently. "Do you still read?" "At night," he admitted, a sad smile touching his lips. "When I can't sleep. It's the only thing that still connects me to that boy I was." She leaned in, kissing his cheek softly. "He's still there," she murmured. "I can see him. In the moments when you think no one's watching, when you really smile, when you play piano. He's still there, Franklin." He turned to her, and what she saw in his eyes made her lose her breath. Gratitude, relief, and something deeper, more frightening. "With you," he said, his voice hoarse, "I can imagine a different life. For the first time in years, I want something beyond loyalty and violence. I want mornings like this. I want you sitting beside me while I play. I want to build something that isn't made of fear and power." Tears burned her eyes, but they were good tears. "Then build it with me," she whispered. He responded by pulling her onto his lap, his lips finding hers with an urgency that took all the air from her lungs. Her hands rose to his hair, fingers burying themselves in the dark strands as he held her, as if she might disappear at any moment. The kiss deepened, became more desperate. His hands slid down her back, exploring, memorizing every curve through the thin fabric of her blouse. She could feel his heart beating against her chest as fast as her own. When they finally separated, both were trembling. Franklin rested his forehead against hers, trying to regain control. "Emmy," he began, voice rough. "If we don't stop now—" "Don't stop," she whispered, eyes meeting his. "Not this time." Something changed in his gaze, the last barrier falling. He stood, carrying her with him, and Emmy wrapped her legs around his waist, arms around his neck. He carried her through the living room, up the stairs leading to the master bedroom, each step measured and deliberate. The bedroom was bathed in the soft light of the moon, filtering through the curtains, the sound of rain creating an intimacy that seemed to wrap them in their own world. Franklin set her on her feet beside the bed, his hands holding her face as he studied her with an intensity that left her speechless. "Are you sure?" he asked, giving her one last chance to back away. In response, Emmy reached for the buttons of her own blouse, fingers working slowly while maintaining eye contact. She saw the moment his breath stopped, saw darkness take over his eyes, saw his hands clench into fists at his sides as he fought for control. When the blouse fell to the floor, she reached for his hands, guiding them to her waist. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she whispered. And then there were no more words. Just touches, sighs, and the promise of something that would change everything. Franklin's fingers trembled, something Emmy never imagined possible in such a controlled man. He traced the line of her shoulders with a reverence that made her shiver, as if touching something sacred for the first time. The moonlight cast shadows on their faces, transforming the moment into something ethereal, suspended between real and dream. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his rough voice laden with emotion. "So perfectly beautiful that sometimes it hurts to look at you." Emmy felt her heart clench. She reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers working slowly, giving him time to protest, to stop. But he remained still, just watching her with those golden eyes that burned with a fire she'd never seen before. When the shirt finally fell, revealing his broad, muscular chest marked by scars that told stories she didn't yet know, Emmy couldn't resist. Her hands splayed against his warm skin, feeling his heart beating wildly beneath her palms. Each scar was a reminder of the dangerous world he lived in, but now, in this moment, he was just a vulnerable man before her. Franklin closed his eyes at her touch, as if each caress were both pleasure and pain. "Emmy," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly, "I need you to understand something." She looked up, meeting his eyes when they opened again. "What?" He held her wrists gently, bringing her hands to his chest, keeping them pressed there against his heart. "I've never—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Never felt this before. This need to be close to someone. This fear of ruining everything. This desire to be better than I am. You scare me, Emmy. How much I need you scares me." Tears burned her eyes. She leaned in, kissing the center of his chest, right above the heart that beat as fast as hers. "You scare me too," she confessed against his skin, "because I know that after you nothing else will be enough. No one else will make my heart race just by walking into a room. No one else will make me feel truly alive." He groaned softly, the sound coming from somewhere deep inside him. His hands rose to her face, tilting it back so he could capture her lips in a kiss that was different from all the others. Slower, deeper, loaded with all the words neither of them could say. His hands slid down her back, finding the clasp of her bra. He paused, fingers hesitating, giving her one last chance to pull back, but Emmy only deepened the kiss, communicating wordlessly that she wasn't going anywhere. When the garment finally fell, Franklin pulled back slightly, his eyes traveling over her with an adoration that made her blush. He traced a line from her neck to the valley between her breasts with his fingertips, so lightly it was almost torture. "Perfect," he whispered. "Completely perfect." Emmy felt her legs weaken under the intensity of his gaze. As if sensing it, Franklin guided her gently to the bed, laying her carefully against the soft sheets. He leaned over her, supporting himself on his elbows so as not to crush her with his weight, and just watched her for a long moment. "What is it?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than intended. "I'm memorizing," he replied, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "This moment. You like this. The way you're looking at me. I want to remember this forever." She smiled, her hands rising to caress his face, fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Then make it worth remembering," she teased softly. Something changed in his eyes, the last remnant of hesitation disappearing. He captured her lips again, but this time the kiss was pure hunger. His hands explored, discovered, worshipped every inch of exposed skin as she arched beneath him. her own fingers digging into his shoulders. The rest of their clothes disappeared in a succession of hurried movements, but even in the urgency there was care. The way he checked her eyes with each new touch, how he waited for her approval before continuing, how he whispered sweet words in Portuguese she never knew he knew. "Do you want me, Franklin?" she asked, echoing the question that had hung between them for so long. He stopped, rising on his elbows to look directly at her. What she saw in his eyes stole all the air from her lungs. Desire, yes, but also something deeper, more frightening. "I want you," he said, each word deliberate and loaded with meaning. "More than I should, more than is safe for either of us. I want you in every way a man can want a woman, physically, emotionally, permanently. You've become my obsession, my necessity, my only truth in this world of lies." A sob of emotion escaped her. "Franklin, but I also fear you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I fear what this world can do to you. I fear I'm not strong enough to protect you from everything. I fear that one day you'll wake up and realize you deserve someone better, someone with clean hands and a bright future." Emmy held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. "I don't want clean hands. I don't want a bright future with someone safe and predictable. I want your hands, Franklin. I want your scars and your secrets. I want your coffee mornings and your piano nights. I want every broken piece of you, because it's you who makes my heart beat. Only you." His expression crumbled, all defenses falling at once. He kissed her with a desperation that was almost painful, and Emmy responded with equal fervor, their bodies finally uniting in a rhythm both ancient and new. There was no rush. Every movement was deliberate, every touch loaded with meaning. Franklin whispered her name like a prayer, and Emmy responded with touches that said everything words couldn't express. When they finally reached the peak together, it was with eyes fixed on each other, witnessing the vulnerability, the surrender, the completeness. And in the silence that followed, as their breathing calmed and their bodies remained intertwined, both knew that something fundamental had changed. Franklin rolled to the side, pulling her to his chest, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. He kissed the top of her head, her shoulder, any part of her he could reach. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, and she could hear the genuine concern in his voice. Emmy leaned back, meeting his eyes. A slow smile spread across her face. "I'm more than okay," she replied. "I'm complete." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." "You already deserve me," she whispered back, "just for being who you are, just for making me feel this way." They remained like that for a long time, wrapped in darkness and each other's warmth, the sound of rain outside creating a bubble of intimacy that seemed to exist outside of time. It was Franklin who broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. "Something about why I protected you all these years." Emmy pulled back slightly to see him, her hand resting on his chest. "What?" He took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "When your father asked me to take care of you, he also told me something. Something you probably don't know." Her heart raced, a sudden anxiety tightening her chest. "What did he say?" Franklin held her hand, intertwining their fingers. "He told me you were the most important person in his life, that he'd made mistakes, gotten involved with the wrong people, but that all he wanted was to give you a better chance. He told me you were brilliant, kind, brave, and that if something happened to him, you'd be alone." Tears began to silently stream down her face. "And then he looked me in the eyes," Franklin continued, his own voice thick with emotion, "and said, 'Take care of her, as if she were yours, because when you meet her, you'll understand why she's worth everything.'" A sob escaped her. "He said that." "He did," Franklin confirmed, wiping her tears with his thumb. "And he was right. From the first moment I saw you at the airport 2 years ago, with your frightened but determined eyes, your old suitcase and your enormous dreams, I knew your father wasn't exaggerating. I knew you would change everything." Emmy couldn't speak, too many emotions colliding inside her. So she just kissed him, a kiss wet with tears but full of gratitude, love, and promise. When they separated, she nestled against him again, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping your promise, for protecting me, for giving me the chance to truly know you." He kissed her hair, his arms tightening around her. "Don't thank me," he murmured, "because protecting you was never a sacrifice. It was the greatest privilege of my life." And as the night wore on and they finally succumbed to sleep, intertwined and complete, both knew there was no going back. They'd crossed the line, surrendered their hearts, and now all that remained was discovering where this path would lead them. But for now, in this perfect moment, it was enough. Morning arrived softly, with golden rays of sun streaming through the curtains and drawing patterns on Emmy's bare skin. She woke slowly, aware of the warmth beside her, of Franklin's heavy arm wrapped around her waist, of his steady breathing against her neck. For one perfect moment, she just existed in that peace, the kind of peace that comes from finally being where you're meant to be. His fingers began to move, tracing lazy circles on her stomach, and she knew he was awake too. "Good morning." His voice was hoarse from sleep, even deeper than usual, sending pleasant shivers down her spine. "Good morning," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. The morning light made him even more handsome, if that was possible. Tousled hair, stubble shadowing his jaw, golden eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. He smiled, that slow, private smile that was only hers, and leaned in to kiss her softly. "Sleep well?" he asked, fingers brushing strands of hair from her face. "Better than I have in years," she admitted, snuggling closer. "You?" "Like never before," he replied, and there was such raw truth in those words that her heart clenched. They remained like that for a while longer, just existing together, until reality began to seep in. Franklin sighed, a reluctant sound, and Emmy knew something was coming. "I need to tell you something," he finally said, pulling back slightly to see her clearly. "Something you're not going to like." Her stomach contracted, but she kept her voice steady. "What?" He sat up, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she was beginning to recognize. Emmy sat up too, pulling the sheet to cover herself, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "There's a meeting tonight," he began, choosing his words carefully. "With the Castellano family. They're our rivals, for lack of a better word. And there's been growing tension over the past few weeks." "Okay," Emmy said slowly. "And what does that have to do with me?" Franklin looked at her directly, and what she saw in his eyes made her freeze. "They know about you," he said. "About the dinner, about what you said, about the fact that you're under my protection. And Victor Castellano, their boss, specifically asked for you to be present at the meeting." "Why?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "To test me," Franklin replied, jaw tightening. "To see how far my protection goes. To check if there's something more between us that they can use as leverage." Anger began to boil inside her, not at Franklin, but at this world that treated people like chess pieces. "So I'm bait," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "No," he responded firmly, holding her face in his hands. "You're mine. And that's exactly what we're going to show them. Not as weakness, but as strength. They need to understand that touching you means war." Something about the way he said "you're mine" sent warmth through her, but there was also fear. Fear of the unknown, of the danger she was about to face. "Do I have to go?" she asked softly. "No," he replied immediately. "If you say no, I refuse. I'll find another way to handle this, but Emmy—" He hesitated, his thumbs caressing her cheeks. "If you go, if you stand by my side through this, we send a message. A message that you're not just someone I protect, but someone I chose. Someone who's with me by their own choice." Emmy thought for a long moment, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to hide, stay safe in this beachfront apartment. But another part, the part that had always been brave, that had crossed an ocean alone, that had defied expectations, knew that running wasn't an option. "I'll go," she finally said, and saw relief and pride shine in his eyes. "But you need to prepare me. Tell me what to expect, how to act, what not to do." He pulled her into a tight embrace, face buried in her hair. "You're incredible," he murmured. "Braver than anyone I know." "Or more insane," she replied, trying to lighten the tension. He laughed softly, pulling back to look at her. "We'll spend the day preparing you," he said. "And tonight you'll walk into that room like a queen, and everyone will know you're mine." The following hours were intense. Franklin guided her through every possible scenario, every protocol, every potential danger. He taught her to read expressions, to maintain a mask of serenity even when terrified, to use silence as a weapon. Never show fear, he instructed, hands on her shoulders as she practiced keeping a neutral expression. Fear is an invitation. Victor is like a shark, he can smell blood in the water. And if he provokes me? Emmy asked. Look at me, Franklin replied immediately. If you feel lost or scared, just look at me. I'll always be there. When the sun began to set, Franklin led her to the closet. There, hanging as if it had been waiting for this moment, was the most stunning dress she'd ever seen. Emerald green, elegant neckline but not vulgar, fabric that hugged every curve of her body before falling in soft waves to the floor. When? She started to ask. I had it made for you weeks ago, he admitted, even before that night at dinner. I knew eventually you'd have to enter this world officially. And when that happened, I wanted you to feel powerful. Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back. Instead, she turned to him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. An hour later, Emmy stood before the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The dress fit perfectly, highlighting her figure without being inappropriate. Her hair was pulled into an elegant bun, a few loose strands framing her face. The makeup was subtle but impactful, dark red lips, lined eyes that seemed to see through people. Franklin appeared behind her in the reflection, impeccable in a black three-piece suit that made his shoulders seem even broader. His eyes traveled over her image, and she saw the moment his breath stopped. He began. But words seemed to fail. Presentable? She offered with a nervous smile. Devastating, he corrected, hands landing on her waist. Absolutely devastating. He leaned in, lips grazing her neck just below her ear, sending shivers through her entire body. They're going to look at you, he murmured against her skin. All of them. They'll desire you, envy you, question you. But you need to remember one thing. What? She asked, voice coming out tremulous. He turned her in his arms, hands holding her face as he stared at her, with an intensity that stole all the air from her lungs. You're mine, he said, each word a promise and a claim. And I'm yours. Nothing that happens tonight changes that, nothing. She nodded, unable to speak through the knot in her throat. He kissed her then, deep, possessive, marking her in a way that left no doubt. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. Franklin studied her for another moment and then, surprising her, went to his dresser drawer. When he returned, he held a small velvet box. Franklin, she began, but he shook his head. It's not what you're thinking, he said, opening the box. Not yet, but it's a promise. Inside lay a delicate white gold necklace with a key-shaped pendant. It was simple, but exquisitely beautiful. A key, she asked, lightly touching the piece. To this place, he replied, taking the necklace from the box. To my home, to wherever I am. You always have access, always have a safe place, always have a way to come back to me. The tears she'd been holding finally fell. Franklin fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers lingering on her nape. Perfect, he murmured, watching her in the mirror. You're perfect. The restaurant was discreet but elegant, tucked away on a side street in the French Quarter. From outside, it looked like just another old establishment, but when they entered, Emmy immediately felt the difference. The way everyone stopped, how gazes turned toward them, how silence fell like a heavy cloak. Franklin's hand was firm on her back, guiding her through the main hall to a private room in the back. Each step seemed to echo, each look seemed to weigh, but Emmy kept her head high, remembering everything Franklin had taught her. The door opened, revealing a long table where 6 men were already seated. All stood when she entered, a gesture of respect she didn't expect, but it was the man at the head of the table who captured her attention. Victor Castellano was older than Franklin, perhaps in his 50s, with perfectly styled grey hair and dark eyes that missed nothing. He smiled when he saw her, but it was the kind of smile a predator gives before attacking. Ah, he said, his voice smooth but dangerous. The famous Emmy. Franklin has told us so little about you. How negligent of him. Franklin guided her to a chair, pulling it out for her before sitting beside her. His hand found hers under the table, intertwining their fingers in silent support. Emmy isn't business, Franklin replied, his voice polite but with an edge of steel. She's here as a courtesy, nothing more. Of course, Victor agreed, but his eyes remained fixed on Emmy. So tell me, dear, how does a young Brazilian woman end up in the inner circles of the Whitmore family? It must be a fascinating story. Emmy felt the pressure of Franklin's fingers, a silent warning. She took a deep breath, remembering her lessons. Hard work and fortunate circumstances, she replied, keeping her voice steady. Nothing more glamorous than that. Modest, Victor commented, leaning back in his chair. I like that. But we both know there's more to the story, isn't there? A young woman so beautiful, so intelligent, so valuable. Surely Franklin has specific reasons for keeping you so close. The insinuation was clear, and Emmy felt anger boiling inside her. But before she could respond, Franklin spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Choose your next words carefully, Victor, he said. There are lines that, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Victor's smile widened, but there was a tension in his eyes that wasn't there before. No offense intended, he said, raising his hands in false surrender. Just natural curiosity. The meeting proceeded with discussions about territories, business, agreements. Emmy remained silent most of the time, observing, learning, understanding the power dynamics that flowed invisibly around the table. But whenever Victor looked in her direction, which happened with disturbing frequency, she maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. It was near the end, when tensions had eased and wine had flowed freely, that Victor made his final move. I must say, Franklin, he commented casually, swirling his glass, you've always been a man of exceptional control. Never saw you get attached to anything or anyone. Interesting how that's changed. Franklin didn't take the bait, but Emmy felt tension radiating from him. People change, he replied simply. Yes, Victor agreed, his eyes sliding to Emmy. And sometimes those changes create vulnerabilities. The silence that followed was thick, loaded. Emmy knew this was the moment, the real test. And before Franklin could respond, before he could turn this into something violent, she spoke. With all due respect, Mr. Castellano, her voice was clear, firm, without fear, vulnerability and weakness aren't the same thing. A man strong enough to care about something beyond power isn't vulnerable. He's complete. Maybe that's what bothers you. Silence exploded. Everyone at the table froze, eyes wide, alternating between her and Victor. Franklin squeezed her hand under the table, part warning, part pride. Victor stared at her for a long moment, and then surprisingly he laughed, a genuine appreciative sound. Well, he said, raising his glass toward her, it seems Franklin chose well. You have courage, girl. I respect that. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. Franklin, he said, extending his hand, I think we've reached an understanding tonight. Franklin stood as well, shaking the offered hand. Yes, he agreed. I think we have. When they finally left the restaurant, the night was clear and cold. Franklin guided her to the car in silence, and it wasn't until they were inside, with the doors closed and privacy restored, that he spoke. You, he began, turning to face her, are the most incredible person I've ever met. And then he kissed her, right there in the parking lot, with a passion that took all the air from her lungs. When they finally separated, both were smiling. Let's go home, he said, and the way he said home, as if it were a place they shared, a place that belonged to both of them, made her heart overflow. Yes, she agreed. Let's go home. The ride back was quiet, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was the silence of two people processing the intensity of what had just happened, of adrenaline still coursing through their veins, of relief mixed with something deeper. Franklin's hand remained intertwined with hers the entire way, his thumb tracing lazy circles on her skin, a gesture Emmy was beginning to recognize as his way of grounding himself, of calming down. The city lights streaked past the windows in blurs, creating dancing patterns in the dark interior of the car. Emmy watched Franklin's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his lips pressed together slightly as he drove, lost in thoughts she couldn't fully decipher. Are you angry? She finally asked, breaking the silence. He turned his head briefly to look at her, surprise evident in his eyes. Angry? He repeated. Why? About what I said to Victor, she answered, nervously biting her lower lip. I shouldn't have spoken like that. It was impulsive and... "It was perfect," Franklin interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "It was exactly what needed to be said, and you did it with a grace and courage that left me speechless." He squeezed her hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss her fingers softly. "Emmy, you have no idea," he continued, his eyes returning to the road, "what it felt like to see you there, holding your ground, standing up to men most people would be afraid of. I was—" He paused, searching for the words. "I was completely in love with you in that moment, more than I already was." Her heart raced. It was the first time he'd used that word. In love. Not love yet, but it was getting close. Dangerously close. "Franklin," she whispered, but he shook his head. "Let me finish," he asked. "During that entire meeting, I was torn between pride and terror. Pride in having you by my side, in seeing how you shine even in difficult situations, and terror. Terror that I'd put you in danger, that my selfish need to have you close might cost something I could never forgive myself for." Emmy saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel too tightly. She unbuckled her seatbelt, sliding across the seat until she was closer to him, her free hand resting on his thigh. "Look at me," she asked softly. He shot a quick glance in her direction, and what she saw in his eyes made her chest tighten. Guilt, fear, desire, all mixed together. "I chose to be there," she said firmly. "You gave me the option to refuse, and I chose to stay by your side. That wasn't something you forced on me. It was my decision, my choice, and I'd do it all over again." Franklin didn't respond, but she saw the way his jaw worked, how he blinked rapidly as if fighting something back. When they finally arrived at the beachfront apartment, he parked but didn't get out right away. He stayed seated, hands still on the wheel, breathing visibly faster. "Franklin," Emmy called softly. He finally turned to face her completely, and what she saw took all the air from her lungs. His eyes burned, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Desire. Need. Possessiveness. "When he looked at you that way," Franklin said, his voice low and rough. "When he insinuated those things, when he treated you like you were something he could question or evaluate, I wanted to destroy everything. I wanted to show him, show everyone in that room exactly who you belong to." Emmy felt the heat rise up her neck, spread across her cheeks. The intensity in his gaze was almost tangible. "And who do I belong to?" she challenged softly, leaning closer. "Mine," he answered without hesitation. "Completely irrevocably mine." Before she could respond, he got out of the car, rounding it in quick strides to open her door. He extended his hand, and when she accepted it, he pulled her out of the car with an urgency that made her heart race. They crossed the building's lobby in tense silence, the security guard nodding discreetly, but wisely not interrupting them. The elevator seemed to take forever, and during the entire ride to the top floor, Franklin stayed behind her, so close she could feel the heat of his body, his heavy breathing against her neck. When the doors finally opened directly into the apartment, Emmy barely had time to take 2 steps before she felt his hands on her waist, turning her to face him. "Are you still angry?" she asked again, but this time there was a smile playing on her lips. His eyes darkened even more. "I've been trying to control myself since day one," he said, echoing words he'd said before. "But you're breaking me, Emmy, completely breaking me." "Then stop controlling yourself," she whispered, her hands moving up to his jacket lapel. "Just for today, just for now." Something in him gave. She saw the exact moment the last barrier fell. He picked her up in one fluid motion, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, arms around his neck. He carried her through the living room, climbing the stairs with determined steps, his lips never leaving hers. The kiss was different this time, more urgent, more desperate, loaded with all the emotions of the night, all the fear and relief and pride and desire, mixed into a storm that threatened to consume them. When they reached the bedroom, Franklin set her down gently, but his hands remained on her waist, holding her, as if she might disappear. "You were incredible tonight," he said, his fingers finding the zipper at the back of her dress. "So strong, so brilliant, so completely perfect. And all I could think about was bringing you home, having you all to myself, showing you exactly what you mean to me." The zipper descended slowly. his fingers tracing her spine as the fabric loosened. Emmy shivered under his touch, her entire body hyper-aware of his every movement. "Show me," she whispered, turning in his arms, her eyes meeting his. "Show me everything." The dress slipped off her shoulders, falling in a whisper of silk around her feet. She stood before him in just her lingerie, the necklace he'd given her glowing against her skin. Franklin looked at her as if he were seeing art, as if she were something too precious to touch. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he murmured, his hands trembling slightly as he reached to touch her face. "And I still can't believe you're real. That you chose to be here with me." Emmy held his wrists, bringing his hands to her lips, kissing each palm, each finger. "I choose you," she said between kisses. "Today, tomorrow, always. I choose you, Franklin." He groaned softly, pulling her into a kiss that stole all rational thought. His hands explored, memorized, worshipped every curve, every line of her body. And Emmy responded with equal fervor, her fingers working on the buttons of his shirt, pushing the jacket off his shoulders, desperate to feel skin against skin. When they finally fell onto the bed, tangled and breathless, there were no more words, just touches that spoke volumes, gazes that promised eternities, sighs that echoed everything they couldn't say out loud. Franklin touched her with a reverence that made her feel adored, but there was also an urgency in him, a need to mark, to possess, to ensure she was real and there with him. And Emmy received him completely, opening not just her body, but her heart, her soul, everything she was. "I want you," he whispered against her lips. "Not just now, not just tonight. I want you always, in every possible way." "Then have me," she responded, her eyes shining with tears of emotion. "Have me completely." And when their bodies finally joined, it was with an intensity that surpassed everything they'd shared before. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a fusion of souls that left them both trembling and vulnerable. Franklin buried his face in her neck, murmuring her name like a prayer, like a vow, like the only truth he knew. And Emmy held him as if he were her anchor, her safe harbor in the midst of all storms. Afterward, when their breathing calmed and their hearts began to slow, they remained intertwined, refusing to separate even by an inch. Franklin rolled to the side, pulling her to his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back as she rested her head over his heart. "Thank you," he said softly, kissing the top of her head. "For what?" she asked, tilting back to look at him. "For being by my side tonight, for choosing me, for making me believe that maybe I deserve something good in my life." His voice was loaded with emotion, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. Emmy moved up until she could kiss him softly, pouring all her love into the gesture. "You deserve everything good," she murmured against his lips, "and I'm going to spend as long as you'll let me showing you that." He held her tighter, as if afraid she might dissolve between his fingers. "Forever," he whispered. "I want forever with you, Emmy." And as the night enveloped them, and the sound of the waves created a soft melody outside, they both knew they'd crossed another line. There was no going back, no more pretending. They were one now, united in all the ways that mattered. And for the first time in their lives, they both felt completely, perfectly at home. Dawn's light filtered through the curtains, painting the bedroom in golden and pink tones. Emmy woke slowly, aware of the warmth surrounding her, of the strong arms around her, of the steady breathing against her neck. For one perfect moment, she just existed in that peace, memorizing every sensation. Franklin's woody scent, the comforting weight of his arm over her waist, the way their bodies fit together perfectly. His fingers began to move, tracing the curve of her hip with a deliberate slowness that sent shivers across her skin. She knew he was awake, knew by the way his breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more conscious. "Good morning," she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. Franklin opened his eyes, and what she saw there took her breath away. It wasn't just desire, though there was plenty of that. It was something deeper, more frightening. It was pure adoration, mixed with a tenderness that made her heart squeeze. "Good morning, my love," he replied, and the casual way he said, "My love," calm as if it were already natural, as if she'd always been that, made tears burn her eyes. He noticed, of course. His fingers immediately rose to her face, his thumb wiping away a tear that escaped before she could contain it. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, concern colouring his voice. "Nothing," she answered, smiling through the tears. "It's just that you called me my love. And it felt so right, so natural, like you'd always called me that." Something changed in his expression. It softened, opened, became even more vulnerable. "Because in my heart, you always were," he confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "From day one, you were my love. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it out loud." Emmy couldn't contain the sob that escaped. She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. Gratitude, joy, love so deep it seemed endless. And Franklin kissed her back with equal intensity, his hands burying themselves in her hair, keeping her close as if she were life itself. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Franklin rolled, placing her on top of him, hands resting on her waist as he looked at her with an expression that made her feel like the most loved woman in the world. "Stay like this," he asked, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine. "Let me see you. Let me memorize this." Emmy leaned over him, her hair falling like a curtain around their faces, creating an intimate space that belonged only to them. She could see every detail of him in this light, the small lines around his eyes, the thin scar above his eyebrow, the golden flecks in his eyes that seemed to shine when he looked at her like this. "You're so beautiful," she whispered, her fingers tracing his face like an artist memorizing their work. "Sometimes I look at you and can't believe this is real." "That you're real," he smiled, that slow, devastating smile that was only hers. "I'm very real," he murmured, his hands sliding to her hips, pulling her closer. "And you're mine. Very much mine." The kiss that followed was different from the previous ones, slower, more exploratory, as if they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. Maybe this moment could stretch infinitely, suspended between dawn and reality. Franklin's hands explored every available inch of skin, memorizing, worshipping, claiming, and Emmy melted under each touch, her body responding instinctively to his, as if they were made for each other. "Emmy," he whispered against her lips, his voice rough with desire. "I need you. Now." "Then have me," she responded, her eyes meeting his, letting him see everything she felt. "Whenever you want, however you want. I'm yours." Something wild flashed in his eyes. He turned her in one fluid motion, placing her on her back in the bed, hovering over her with an intensity that made her heart race. But before continuing, he paused, his fingers tracing her face, with a tenderness that contrasted with the fire in his eyes. "Tell me to stop and I'll stop," he said, echoing earlier words. "No matter how much I want you, your comfort, your desires, come first. Always." Emmy felt her heart overflow. How could this man, this powerful, dangerous, feared man, be so gentle with her? How could he make her feel so precious, so protected, so loved? "Don't stop," she whispered, her hands rising to his face, pulling him closer. "Never stop. I want you, Franklin, in every way, completely." The groan that escaped him was pure desire mixed with something deeper. He kissed her with a passion that stole all thought, all reason, leaving only sensation. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her face, down her neck, tracing the curve of her shoulders. Each touch was reverent, as if he were worshipping something sacred. And to him, Emmy realized, she was. She was his sanctuary, his refuge, his redemption in a world of darkness. When their bodies finally joined, it was with a deliberate slowness that left them trembling. Franklin buried his face in her neck, his entire body tense with the effort to control himself, to make this perfect for her. "Look at me," Emmy asked softly, her hands holding his face. "I want to see you." He lifted his head, and what she saw in his eyes took her breath away. Vulnerability, love, need, everything exposed, without defenses, without masks. "I love you," he confessed, the words coming out as if torn from somewhere deep inside him. "God, I love you so much it hurts. You're everything to me, Emmy. Everything." Tears ran freely down her face now, but they were tears of pure joy. "I love you too," she replied, her voice breaking with emotion. So much, so completely. I love you, Franklin. And then there were no more words. Just the movement of their bodies finding a perfect rhythm. Just sighs and whispered names. Just the feeling of being completely connected, body, mind, and soul. Franklin touched her as if memorizing every inch of skin, as if he wanted to engrave this moment somewhere permanent inside him. And Emmy responded with equal fervor, her hands exploring his broad back, feeling the muscles contract under her fingers, memorizing the weight of him over her, the way he filled every empty space inside her. "You're perfect," he whispered between kisses. "So perfect for me. Made for me." "And you for me," she responded, arching beneath him, lost in the sensation, in the emotion, in the absolute perfection of that moment. The climax, when it came, caught them at the same time. A wave of pleasure so intense it left them trembling and breathless. Franklin buried his face in her neck, murmuring her name like a prayer, like a vow, like the only truth he knew. And Emmy held him as if he were her anchor, her safe harbor, her home. Afterward, when their breathing calmed and their hearts began to slow, they remained intertwined, refusing to separate. Franklin rolled to the side, taking her with him, keeping her snuggled against his chest. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, occasionally stopping to kiss her shoulders, her neck, any part of her he could reach. And Emmy simply existed in that peace, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling the rise and fall of his chest with each breath. "You're mine now," Franklin murmured against her hair. "And I'm yours. Completely. Irrevocably. Forever." Emmy leaned back, meeting his eyes. A slow smile spread across her face. "Forever," she repeated, testing the words. "I like that." He smiled back, that genuine smile that completely transformed his face, making him look years younger, lighter. "Then it's a deal," he said, kissing her softly. "You and me. Against the world, if necessary." "Against the world," she agreed. They stayed like that for hours, sometimes talking quietly about everything and nothing, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Franklin told stories from his childhood, the good ones, before everything fell apart. Emmy shared memories of her father, crying and laughing at the same time as she remembered. "He'd be happy," Franklin said softly, wiping away her tears. "Your father. He'd be happy knowing you found someone who loves you like this." "You think so?" she asked, needing to hear it. "I know," he replied with certainty, "because that's exactly what he asked for, that I find someone who would make you happy, who would protect you, who would love you the way you deserve. He knew somehow. He knew it would be me." Emmy snuggled closer, her heart overflowing with love. For Franklin, for her father, for this impossible but perfect life she was building. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For protecting me, for choosing me, for loving me, for being you." Franklin pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Don't thank me," he murmured. "Loving you isn't a sacrifice. It's a privilege. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." And as the sun climbed higher in the sky and the world outside kept spinning, they remained in their perfect bubble, building memories that would last a lifetime, making promises they intended to keep, loving with an intensity that defied all odds. Because what they had wasn't just passion, it wasn't just chemistry. It was true connection, souls recognizing souls, hearts beating in sync, lives intertwined in ways that couldn't be undone. And for the first time, they both believed in forever. The weeks that followed were like living in a dream neither of them wanted to wake from. The beachfront apartment stopped being just a refuge. It became home. A place where masks could fall, where vulnerabilities were embraced, where love grew in every quiet corner and every shared laugh. Emmy woke every morning to the smell of fresh coffee and the soft sound of Franklin moving around the kitchen. Some mornings, she found him still in sleepwear, hair tousled, working on his laptop with that intense concentration she found irresistibly attractive. Other times, he was already dressed for work, but always barefoot, always waiting for her before leaving. "Good morning, my love," became his standard greeting, said with that soft smile reserved only for her. And Emmy never tired of hearing it, never tired of the way those words made her feel, loved, chosen, at home. The days took on their own rhythm. Franklin still had meetings, business that demanded his attention, but now he included her when he could. Emmy officially began working with him, not just as a translator, but as a consultant, advisor, someone whose opinion he valued and respected. "What do you think?" became a frequent question from him during meetings, his eyes finding hers across the conference table, seeking her perspective, her intelligence. And Emmy flourished under that trust. She contributed ideas, identified problems others didn't see, negotiated with a skill that surprised even Franklin. She was no longer just the girl he protected, she was his partner, in every sense of the word. But it was the nights Emmy treasured most. The nights when the world disappeared, and it was just the two of them. One night she found him sitting on the balcony, a book open on his lap, a forgotten glass of wine beside him. The moonlight bathed his profile, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful curve of his lips as he read. "What are you reading?" she asked softly, sliding onto the bench beside him. He looked up, a smile touching his lips when he saw her. "Neruda," he replied, showing her the book. "Love poetry." I thought it was appropriate. Emmy felt her heart warm. She snuggled against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Read to me," she asked. Franklin hesitated only a moment before beginning, his deep voice transforming the Spanish words into music. "I love you without knowing how or when or from where. I love you straightforwardly, without complexities or pride, so I love you because I know no other way." Tears burned Emmy's eyes. She turned to face him, finding his eyes already fixed on her. "That's how I love you," he said softly, closing the book and setting it aside. Without knowing how to explain it, without being able to quantify it, just completely. She kissed him then, pouring all her love into that gesture. And when they separated, they were both smiling through happy tears. "Dance with me," Franklin said suddenly, standing and extending his hand. "There's no music," Emmy pointed out, but she was already accepting his hand. "We don't need any," he replied, pulling her into his arms. And there, under the stars, with only the sound of waves as melody, they danced. There was no technique, no rehearsed steps, just two bodies moving in sync, two hearts beating as one. Franklin held her close, one hand firm on her waist, the other intertwined with hers. He tilted his head, his nose brushing her hair, breathing her in as if she were air. "I wanted to be a teacher," he said softly, picking up a conversation from weeks ago. "Teach literature, inspire young minds. It seems so distant now, like it was someone else's dream." Emmy pulled back slightly to look at him. "It doesn't have to be," she said. "You can still do that. Somehow. Maybe not in a traditional way, but—" "With you," he interrupted, his eyes shining with something that looked like hope. "I imagine a different life. One where I'm not defined only by power and violence. One where I can be more, better." "You already are more," she insisted, her free hand rising to touch his face. "You're already better. The man who plays piano at night, who reads poetry, who makes me coffee every morning, that's the real you, Franklin, not the mask you wear for the world." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a flower seeking the sun. "You make me want to believe that," he whispered. "Then believe it," she asked. "Because I see it. I see who you really are, and I love you, all of you. The scars and the secrets, the darkness and the light. Everything." Franklin kissed her then, slow, deep, a kiss that spoke of gratitude and love and unspoken promises. And when they finally separated, they were both trembling. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words coming out before he could censor them. Emmy froze, her eyes widening. "What?" He laughed nervously, running his hand through his hair. "I know it's early. I know I should have planned, had a ring, done something romantic and memorable, but Emmy—" He held both her hands, looking directly into her eyes. "I can't imagine a single day of my life without you. I don't want to. You've become my air, my reason, my only certainty in this uncertain world." Tears were already falling down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. "Franklin, you don't have to answer now," he rushed to say, seeing her expression. "I just needed you to know. That someday when it's right, when you're ready, I'll ask again, officially, with a ring and everything, and I'll spend the rest of my life hoping you'll say yes." Emmy let out a laugh wet with tears. "You're impossible," she said, echoing words he'd once said to her. "Completely impossible and perfect and yes." It was his turn to freeze. "Yes?" "Yes," she repeated, laughing now through the tears. "I don't need an elaborate ring or a planned moment. I need you. And if you're asking, my answer is yes. Today, tomorrow, always. Yes." The sound that escaped him was half laugh, half sob. He picked her up, spinning her until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he finally set her back down, he held her face between his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You just made me the happiest man in the world," he said, his voice choked. "Good," she replied, smiling through tears. "Because you make me the happiest woman. Every day." They kissed under the stars, sealing the promise, the commitment, the future they would build together. And when they finally went inside, hands intertwined and hearts overflowing, they both knew they'd found something rare, not just love, but partnership, not just passion, but purpose. That night, as they made love with a tenderness that left them in tears, Franklin whispered promises against her skin. "I'll give you the world," he murmured. "Everything you've ever wanted, everything you deserve." "I only want you," she replied, holding him closer. "Only you, forever." And as the moon witnessed and the ocean sang its approval, they lost themselves in each other once more, building memories that would last a lifetime, making love as if it were both the first and last time, because what they had transcended everything. It was love in its purest sense, unconditional, transformative, eternal. And for the first time in their lives, they both believed they deserved it, that they deserved this happiness, this peace, this love that seemed too big to fit inside their chests. They had found each other against all odds, and now nothing, absolutely nothing, could tear them apart. 3 months had passed since that night under the stars when Franklin asked Emmy to marry him. 3 months in which their lives intertwined even more deeply, becoming indistinguishable from each other. What was his was hers. What was hers was his. Not just possessions, but dreams, fears, hopes. Emmy now officially worked alongside Franklin, no longer in the shadows, but as his recognized partner. She participated in important meetings, contributed to strategic decisions, and gradually the men of the Whitmore family began to respect her, not just as Franklin's woman, but as a force in her own right. "She has an eye for details we miss," Logan commented once during a meeting, his tone respectful, so different from that fateful night months ago. "Whitmore, you chose well." And Franklin, with that proud smile he no longer bothered to hide, simply replied, "I know. But not everything was work. The night still belonged only to them, stolen moments where the world disappeared, and it was just Franklin and Emmy, building their own private universe." One of those nights, Franklin came home earlier than usual, a restless energy radiating from him. Emmy was in the kitchen preparing dinner, her hair loose and falling in waves down her back, wearing only one of his shirts that reached mid-thigh. He stopped in the doorway, just watching her for a long moment, the way she moved with natural grace, how she hummed quietly a song he didn't recognize, how she seemed completely at home in his space. His heart squeezed with so much love it hurt. "Are you going to stand there watching me or help me?" Emmy asked without turning, but there was a smile in her voice. Franklin laughed, crossing the kitchen to wrap around her from behind, arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "Watching you is one of my favorite pastimes," he murmured against her neck. "You're impossible," she said, but tilted her head to give him better access. He kissed the path from her shoulder to her neck, feeling her shiver in his arms. "Impossible for you," he corrected. "Seeing you like this in my shirt, in my kitchen, in my heart, you completely destroy me, Emmy." She turned in his arms, hands rising to his face. "Good," she whispered, "because the feeling is completely mutual." They kissed there slowly, savoring as if they had all the time in the world, and maybe they did. Maybe this was just the beginning of an eternity of moments like this. When they finally separated, Franklin held her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I have something for you," he said, and there was nervousness in his voice she rarely heard. "What?" she asked, curiosity shining in her eyes. He guided her to the living room, making her sit on the couch before briefly disappearing into the bedroom. When he returned, he held a blue velvet box, Not the same one from months ago with the necklace, but something new. Emmy felt her heart race. She knew what it was. Knew by the way he held it, by the way his fingers trembled slightly, by the shine in his eyes. Franklin knelt before her, this powerful, feared man who never knelt for anyone, and opened the box. The ring that gleamed back was perfect. A solitaire diamond in white gold. Classic but unique, exactly like her. Simple on the surface, but with infinite depth when light hit it. "I know you already said yes," Franklin began, his voice rough with emotion. "That night under the stars, you gave me the most important answer of my life. But I needed to do this right, needed to give you the moment you deserve." Tears were already falling down her face, but she didn't wipe them away, just watched him with all the love she felt written across her face. "Emmy," he continued, holding her free hand, "you came into my life like a hurricane disguised as a gentle breeze. You made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. You showed me there's more to life than power and control, that there's beauty even in darkness, that there's hope even when everything seems lost." He paused, breathing deeply, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You made me want to be better, not from duty or obligation, but because when I look into your eyes, I see the version of myself I always wanted to be. You complete me in ways I didn't even know I was broken." A sob escaped her, but she just squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "So I'm asking you officially before God and the universe," he said, taking the ring from the box. "Will you marry me? Not for protection, not from obligation, but because I love you. Because with you I'm a better man, because you're my home, my peace, my only truth. Marry me, Emmy. Give me the privilege of loving you for the rest of my life." Emmy couldn't speak through the tears, so she just nodded vigorously, laughing and crying at the same time. "I need to hear it," Franklin said softly, a smile touching his lips even through his own tears. "Please, my love, let me hear you say it." "Yes," she finally managed to say, her voice shaky but firm. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. For everything you said. And more. Because you complete me too. Because you make me feel safe and challenged at the same time. Because when I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself." Franklin slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and when it finally settled perfectly, as if it had been made to be there, he brought her hand to his lips, kissing the ring, then her palm, then her wrist. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me a reason to believe in happy endings." Emmy slid from the couch to her knees, wrapping him in her arms, holding him tight while they both cried tears of pure joy. "I love you," she whispered against his neck. "Love you so much it's scary. Love you in ways I didn't know were possible." "I love you too," he replied, burying his face in her hair, "more than words can express, more than actions can show. I love you, Emmy. Today, tomorrow, always." They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the living room floor, holding each other as if they were the only two people in the world. And in that moment, maybe they were. Weeks later, the beachfront restaurant was one of their favorites. Discreet, elegant, with a view of the ocean that seemed to stretch infinitely. The table was set on the private terrace, candles flickering softly, rose petals scattered, everything perfect. Emmy wore a simple but stunning white dress, the engagement ring catching the light from all the candles. Franklin was impeccable in a navy suit that made his eyes seem even more golden. They dined slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment, talking about the future they would build, laughing at recent memories, planning the life they would share. "When do you want to get married?" Franklin asked, his fingers playing with hers across the table. "Soon," Emmy replied, smiling. "I don't want a huge wedding, just us, the people who matter, and promises that will last a lifetime." "Perfect," he agreed, "because I can't wait to call you my wife." "And I can't wait to call you my husband," she replied, her heart overflowing. When dessert arrived, Franklin stood extending his hand. "Dance with me?" he asked, like that night months ago. "Here?" she asked, but was already accepting his hand. "Here. Now. Always," he replied, pulling her into his arms. And there, under the star-filled sky with the sound of waves as their music, they danced. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty, just two hearts beating as one, two souls completely intertwined, two futures becoming one. You know, Franklin whispered against her hair, that night at dinner, when you answered that question so boldly, I thought I was losing control, thought I was entering dangerous territory. And were you? Emmy asked, leaning back to look at him. He smiled, that devastating smile that was only hers. I was, he admitted, but it was the best kind of danger, the kind that's worth every second, the kind that changes everything. You saved me, Emmy, from myself, from this world, from the darkness. You brought me back to the light. We saved each other, she corrected softly, because you gave me something precious too. You gave me a home, not just a place, but a person. You're my home, Franklin. Wherever you are is where I belong. They kissed under the moonlight, sealing promises already made and making new ones, and when they finally separated, they were both smiling through happy tears. Forever? Franklin asked, echoing words from so many months ago. Forever, Emmy confirmed. You and me, against the world if necessary. Against the world, he agreed. And as the night enveloped them and the future stretched bright before them, Franklin Whitmore and Emmy finally understood what it meant to be complete. Not because they were perfect, but because they were perfect for each other. Not because they had no scars, but because they loved through the scars. Not because the path would be easy, but because they would walk it together. The love they found wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, imperfect, deeply human. And that's exactly why it was perfect. Because sometimes the best stories aren't about finding someone without flaws. They're about finding someone whose flaws fit perfectly with yours. Someone who sees you completely and loves you even more for it. And Franklin and Emmy had found exactly that. Not just love, but belonging. Not just passion, but peace. Not just a partner, but a home. And together, they were finally complete. In the end, true love doesn't choose the right moment. It simply happens, transforming everything it touches. Franklin and Emmy discovered that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as dangers, and that courage isn't about avoiding fear, but loving despite it. They learned that belonging to someone isn't losing freedom, but finding home. And they understood that the most beautiful endings aren't those without scars, but those where two imperfect souls choose to heal together. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many storms we face. What matters is having someone who holds our hand through them, who sees us completely and loves us even more for it. Is there any purer form of love than that? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories that move hearts.